One of the biggest pharmaceutical companies on Earth, the maker of drugs worth billions, started as a dried milk operation in a tiny New Zealand town. That company is GlaxoSmithKline. And the product that built its empire? Powdered milk. Here's what most people don't know. Powdered milk didn't start in a lab. It didn't start in a factory. It started on the backs of Mongolian war horses over 700 years ago. Since then, this chalky white powder has fed armies on the march. It's survived a 100-year trip to Antarctica. It's shaped the fates of nations during wartime. And eventually, someone discovered how easy this powder was to fake, with consequences nobody saw coming. Today, the powdered milk industry is worth over $30 billion a year. But the story of how it got there is stranger, darker, and more dramatic than you'd ever guess from a product sitting in the back of your pantry. This is the untold history of powdered milk. The year is 1295. Marco Polo has just returned to Venice from 24 years in Asia. He's full of stories. One of them is about the Mongol cavalry under Kublai Khan. These warriors covered massive distances, 50, 60 miles a day on horseback. They needed food that was light, portable, and wouldn't rot in a saddlebag. So they carried sun-dried skimmed milk. Marco Polo described it as a kind of paste. The Mongols would boil milk, skim off the fat to make butter, and then dry the remaining liquid in the sun. What they got wasn't really powder. It was more like hard, chalky chunks of dried cheese. But the idea was brilliant. Remove the water from milk, and you've got something that lasts. The problem? Their solution had one enormous flaw. Sun-drying was slow, it was unpredictable, and the result tasted terrible. For the next 500 years, the challenge stayed the same. Milk is nearly 90% water. Remove that water without cooking what's left. Do it cheaply. Do it quickly, and somehow make the result turn back into something drinkable afterward. Nobody could crack it. For half a century, from the early 1800s onward, inventors across Russia and Britain tried. A Russian physician created a small-scale drying process in 1802. A Russian chemist produced the first commercially usable dried milk in 1832. British inventors patented vacuum drying methods in 1837 and 1855. They could dry milk. But they couldn't make dried milk anyone actually wanted to drink. The powder tasted burnt. It clumped into stubborn lumps. It refused to dissolve. You'd stir it into water and end up with a chalky, scorched mess floating on top. Then you'd throw it away and walk to the dairy. These weren't failures of ambition. They were failures of technology. The heat destroyed the flavor, the process destroyed the texture, and nobody had solved either problem. The breakthrough required something completely different. Not one invention, but two, developed at the same time on opposite sides of the Atlantic by people who'd never heard of each other. One involved a pair of heated steel drums. The other involved a spray nozzle and a blast of hot air. But before either of those inventions could matter, someone needed to figure out why fresh milk kept killing people. In the mid-1800s, fresh milk was dangerous. There was no pasteurization, no refrigeration. Milk was transported in open containers through filthy streets. In New York City, so-called swill milk dairies fed their cows the leftover grain mash from whiskey distilleries. The cows got sick. The milk got contaminated. Babies died by the thousands. A man named Gail Borden watched this happen. He wasn't a chemist. He wasn't a doctor. He was a Texas surveyor and newspaper publisher who'd already tried and failed to invent a meat biscuit for travelers. But Borden had one obsession: making milk safe. He'd watched children die from contaminated milk, and he believed that if you could remove the water and seal it in a can, you could stop the spoilage. He adapted vacuum evaporation techniques, originally used by Shaker communities to preserve fruit, for milk. In 1856, after 3 years of fighting with the patent office, he received a patent for condensing milk by vacuum. His first factory failed. His second factory failed. Then a New York financier named Jeremiah Milbank invested, and together they founded the New York Condensed Milk Company. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, the Union Army needed shelf-stable food. Fresh milk spoiled in the southern heat. Borden's condensed milk, sold as Eagle brand, became a battlefield staple. The war made his fortune. Borden proved something critical. Removing water from milk wasn't just a scientific curiosity, it was a business. The can solved spoilage. It didn't solve weight. Condensed milk was heavy, sticky, and needed metal containers. Armies wanted something lighter. Explorers wanted something easier to carry. And the world was about to get it, from two completely different inventions that arrived almost simultaneously. In 1872, a man named Samuel Percy filed a U.S. patent describing spray drying, atomizing liquid into heated air. Brilliant concept. Nobody could make it work at scale. Then, in 1901, a German inventor named Robert Stauff patented an improved spray nozzle specifically designed for milk. The Merrill Soul Company of Syracuse, New York, bought his design and refined the process. By 1905, they had the first industrial spray dryer running. It extracted more than 98% of the moisture from liquid milk. The result was a fine, pale powder that actually dissolved in water. They called the product Klim. Spell it backwards. At the same time, across the Atlantic, a German-American inventor named John Augustus Just patented a completely different approach. Drum drying. Two heated steel cylinders rotated against each other. Pour liquid milk between them. The heat evaporates the water instantly, leaving a thin sheet of dried milk stuck to the drums. Scrapers peel it off. An English entrepreneur named James Hatmaker bought the rights and improved the design. The first commercial drum dryer started running in 1903 in England. Two technologies, two continents. Both finally cracked the same centuries-old problem. And one obscure dairy company would accidentally create something much bigger than food. Hatmaker sold the manufacturing rights for New Zealand to a group connected to a trading company called Joseph, Nathan and Sons, an English immigrant family based in Wellington. The Nathans installed a drum dryer at their factory in a tiny town called Bunnythorpe. By 1904, they were exporting dried milk powder to London under the name Defiance Dried Milk. That name didn't last. By 1906, the Nathans renamed their product. They chose a word derived from lactose, the sugar found in milk. They called it Glaxo. Yes, that Glaxo. The same Glaxo that would become one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. GlaxoSmithKline, a company worth over $100 billion, began as a powdered milk brand in a New Zealand farming town. But before the company could transform itself, its product was about to be tested in ways nobody imagined. Someone was about to find out just how long this powder could actually survive. On New Year's Day 1908, the explorer Ernest Shackleton sailed from New Zealand aboard the Nimrod. Destination: Antarctica. Goal: the South Pole. Among the supplies packed into the ship were tins of Defiance brand dried milk, made at the Nathan family's Bunnythorpe factory, barely 20 kilometers from where the ship departed. Shackleton's expedition fell just 97 miles short of the pole. The crew survived. The milk powder stayed behind. Over 100 years later in 2024, scientists from Fonterra, New Zealand's dairy giant, analyzed a sample of that powder. It had been sitting in Shackleton's hut at Cape Royds, Antarctica, since 1908. Here's what stopped them cold. They could tell the milk came from a Frisian cow. They could tell it was milked in either spring or autumn, from a tin abandoned in Antarctica over a century ago. The powder had yellowed. It smelled slightly oxidized, but the fat, protein, and mineral content was still recognizably milk. Remove the water, and milk can outlast the people who drank it. Back in Europe, powdered milk's next chapter was about to be written. In blood. World War I proved powdered milk was useful. World War II made it indispensable. The scale was staggering. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps tried to supply every soldier in the field with 12 ounces of milk per day. Fresh milk couldn't survive the journey to distant battlefields. So virtually all mess hall cooking in World War II used powdered or evaporated milk. Klim, milk spelled backwards, became part of the U.S. Army's jungle ration. Its thick, dense powder survived for years in an unopened can. Even in jungle heat, it lasted at least a week once opened. One officer wrote that the powder kept safely for years if its stout can was unopened. In Britain, the government launched a program called Household Milk. Starting in December 1941, Each person received 1 tin of American-made dried skim milk every 4 weeks. The tins came stamped, specially packed for British Ministry of Food and from the United States of America. On the home front, powdered milk wasn't just food. It was patriotism. Using dried milk meant freeing up fresh supplies for soldiers overseas. Meanwhile, Glaxo was quietly becoming something else entirely. During World War I, Glaxo had pivoted from bulk catering sales to marketing dried milk as a safe food for babies. By 1917, it was a household name across Britain. The company published the Glaxo Baby Book, a free guide to infant care that just happened to recommend Glaxo products at every turn. Then came the pharmaceuticals. In the 1920s, Glaxo added vitamin D supplements to its range. In 1924, it launched Ostalin, its first drug. A chemist named Harry Jeffcott, originally hired to improve quality control in the milk powder operation, pushed the company toward drug development. By 1947, Glaxo Laboratories had swallowed its own parent company, Joseph Nathan and Sons. The milk powder brand had devoured its creator, and then the war ended. Factories built to feed armies suddenly had no army to feed. So here's the question you should be asking. Where do you find a customer who consumes milk every single day, and whose parents will pay almost anything to keep them healthy? The answer was babies, and that answer would change everything. After the war, two things collided. The baby boom sent birth rates surging across the Western world, and a cultural shift made bottle feeding fashionable, modern, scientific, more civilized than breastfeeding. Doctors recommended it. Hospitals promoted it. The main ingredient in baby formula? Powdered milk. Companies that had spent the war years perfecting dried milk production, Nestlé, Borden, Glaxo, suddenly had a massive new market. Military rations became infant nutrition overnight, and the product itself was getting better. In the 1950s, an American researcher named Peebles solved one of powdered milk's oldest problems. He developed a process for instantizing skim milk powder, re-wetting and agglomerating the dry particles so they dissolved quickly in water. Before that, making powdered milk drinkable was a battle. The powder clumped. It clung to the glass. You'd stir, and there'd still be chalky lumps refusing to surrender. Peebles fixed it. Suddenly, anyone could make drinkable milk in seconds. At the same time, powdered milk became a weapon in the Cold War. The United States had enormous dairy surpluses. The government needed somewhere to send them. So dried skim milk became a core part of American food aid, shipped worldwide through programs like Public Law 480, which donated agricultural surpluses to countries in need. UNICEF built on this. Massive milk distribution campaigns spread from post-war Europe to Latin America to Africa. Milk powder, fortified with vitamins A and D, reached millions of children. The glass of milk became a symbol of UNICEF itself. The message was powerful. Powdered milk saves lives, and for a while it genuinely did. But here's what nobody talked about openly. The same countries receiving donated milk powder contained millions of potential paying customers. The problem wasn't the powder anymore, it was the sales strategy. Corporations didn't just see babies in developing countries as people who needed help. They saw them as a market, and the tactics they used to capture that market would trigger one of the longest consumer boycotts in history. By the 1960s, birth rates in Western countries were declining. Formula sales were plateauing. Companies like Nestlé needed new markets. They found them in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The marketing was aggressive. Sales representatives dressed in nurse-like uniforms visited hospitals and maternity wards. They handed out free samples of powdered formula. They told mothers that their product was modern, scientific, and nutritionally superior to breast milk. But even when the powder itself was safe, the water wasn't. Many families had no access to clean water. Mixing formula with contaminated supplies caused infections and diarrhea. And even when the water was clean, many families couldn't afford enough powder, so they stretched it, diluted it to 2 or 3 times the recommended ratio. Their babies got water with a faint taste of milk, not nutrition, and then came the cruelest part. Once a mother stopped breastfeeding and switched to formula, her own milk dried up within days. She couldn't go back. She was locked into buying a product she couldn't afford, mixing it with water that wasn't safe, feeding it to a baby who was slowly starving. In 1973, the New Internationalist published an article called Babies Mean Business. It accused formula companies of creating demand where none existed and dressing up marketing as medical advice. The following year, a British charity called War on Want published a report with a title that landed like a bomb: The Baby Killer. The report named Nestlé directly. It argued the company's marketing practices in developing countries were contributing to infant illness and death. Nestlé denied wrongdoing. The company sued a Swiss activist group that had translated the report. But the lawsuit backfired spectacularly. The trial kept the issue in headlines for 2 years. The judge convicted the activists on a narrow libel charge, then publicly told Nestlé to fundamentally rethink its marketing. In 1977, the Infant Formula Action Coalition, in fact, launched a boycott against Nestlé in the United States. It spread across Europe. Senator Edward Kennedy held Senate hearings on the industry's practices. By 1981, the World Health Organization adopted the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. It called on governments to restrict how companies promoted formula. The boycott was suspended in 1984 after Nestlé agreed to comply. But monitoring groups continued documenting violations for decades. The debate over formula marketing in the developing world hasn't ended. Powdered milk, the product that saved lives in wars and famines, now carried a shadow. The same substance that nourished millions had been weaponized as a marketing tool. But the darkest chapter was still coming. And it had nothing to do with marketing. It had to do with poison. In the summer of 2008, just weeks before the Beijing Olympics, inspectors made a discovery at Sanlu, one of China's largest dairy companies and a leading brand of powdered infant formula. The milk powder contained melamine. Melamine is an industrial chemical used to make plastics, fertilizers, and concrete. It has no place in food. None. But here's why someone put it there. Suppliers were watering down raw milk to increase volume. Watered-down milk tests low for protein. The standard protein test measures nitrogen levels, and melamine is packed with nitrogen. Add melamine to diluted milk, and the test says the protein content looks normal. The milk appears rich. It isn't. It's diluted milk laced with an industrial chemical. The test was fooled. The babies weren't. By September 2008, the Chinese government announced a recall, but the damage was already done. More than 290,000 people, most of them infants, were poisoned. At least 6 babies died. The primary symptom was kidney stones in children so young they should never have had them. The contamination wasn't confined to one company. Powdered milk from 22 different Chinese dairy brands tested positive for melamine. The scandal wasn't a single bad actor, it was an industry-wide failure. 21 people were convicted, 2 were executed. China's milk exports collapsed by 92% in 3 months, but the most disturbing revelation came 2 years later. In 2010, Chinese authorities seized 64 tons of melamine-tainted raw dairy materials. Some of it was powder that should have been destroyed in 2008. Traders had bought the contaminated stockpiles cheaply and tried to put them back into the food supply. The scandal had happened. The punishment had been delivered. And someone tried to do it again. The 2008 scandal wasn't just a crime. It was a system failure. And its strangest consequence is visible thousands of miles from China, in places you wouldn't expect. After the scandal, Chinese parents stopped trusting domestic formula. Completely. Over 100 international brands flooded into the market. Demand for imported powder got so intense that stores in Hong Kong had to limit how many cans each customer could buy. Chinese tourists traveled abroad specifically to bring back foreign baby formula. An entire gray market emerged, personal shoppers buying formula in Australia, Europe, and New Zealand, then shipping it to mainland China at massive markups. That was 2008. The pattern hasn't fully reversed. Today, the global powdered milk market produces roughly 8.4 million tons a year, valued at around $30 billion. New Zealand leads the world, producing 1.9 million tons and supplying about a third of all global exports. The United States is second, Brazil third. The technology is unrecognizable from its origins. Modern spray drying takes seconds. Pasteurized milk goes in. Fine. Soluble powder comes out. The entire operation happens inside gleaming stainless steel facilities that look more like pharmaceutical plants than dairies. And the uses go far beyond a glass of reconstituted milk. Powdered milk is in your chocolate. It's a key ingredient in the energy-dense therapeutic pastes that UNICEF uses to treat severely malnourished children in famine zones. And it travels with astronauts. The industry today is dominated by a handful of giants. Fonterra in New Zealand, Nestlé in Switzerland, Lactalis in France, Dairy Farmers of America. These companies process billions of liters of milk every year. By 2035, the market is projected to reach 9 million tons, valued at over $35 billion. Think about what that means. A product that started as dried paste on a Mongol warhorse became a tool of war, a symbol of humanitarian aid, a pharmaceutical launchpad, a corporate weapon, and a global commodity. What's changed over 7 centuries is how we dry it, how we store it, how we move it, and who gets to control it. 700 years. Same idea. Remove the water, keep the milk. The products we take for granted, the boring ones, the ones forgotten in the back of the pantry, have shaped wars, built empires, and changed how the world feeds its children. If this story surprised you, we've got another one about an everyday product with a history just as strange. It's on screen right now. And if you want more hidden histories like this every week, subscribe. Thanks for watching.